I'm pleased to introduce Kim Laage Saltoft Olsen to our event. We have had the pleasure of his presentation in the past when he had worked as a financial director at Pandora and has spoken often, I believe, on FP&A a few times at previous events in Amsterdam. Kim is currently the CFO and Chief Data Officer of DrugStars, which is an application he will discuss more with us in his presentation, an application regarding medicines. He'll go into more detail. And as I already mentioned, he had previously worked for 7 years in Pandora in Denmark, working on reporting, budgeting, planning, and business partnering, and previously to that at Telia. So we're very happy to have him here, and over to you. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Robert, and hello, everyone. Yeah, so I'm happy that Robert found this way for us to still meet despite the circumstances around this COVID-19. And of course, also like to thank Robert for welcoming me back to this forum as a speaker. And as he said, I've had the pleasure of being here before, back when I worked with Pandora, and I discussed business partnering. But today it will be much more around what I believe big mature companies may learn from the startup world, which is where I'm presently. But let's just to get this started up, just a brief introduction to myself. I mean, Robert already told you a bit about it, but as I said, my name is Kim, and I'm born and raised in proximity of Copenhagen, Denmark, and I'm still here. Took my master's degree in management accounting and business controlling at Copenhagen Business School, and then I've been at Telia company, which is a big telecommunications company in the Nordics. Since then, Pandora, both as a business controller and then since as a finance director, and then now DrugStars, where I'm the CFO and Chief Data Officer, which is a nice synergy where you both have the financial side to the commercial and to the business, and then the data side, which is, as many of you probably know, is very much linked. And as you can see, I mean, most of my professional years have been with the big companies, publicly traded companies with more than 10,000 people employed. And well, now I'm here in DrugStars. It's a startup venture. It's a small company, and we are only 7 people right now. Hopefully, many more in the future. But that's where we are right now. So it's a somewhat different world, and I'll be talking a bit about that today. Just a few words on DrugStars. I mean, Robert tried to give a short intro, but I'll try to put a few more words on it. As I said, we're a small Danish health tech venture company. And basically our mission is to be the global voice of patients on pharmaceuticals, or in other words, the trust pilot for medicines, helping patients to get the most out of their current medications while doing good at the same time. And the way we do that is that patients download our app, which you can see on the screen here, register their medications, and then basically for every dose they take, they press a button and they collect stars, and we will then match those stars with cold cash and donate to a charity of their choice. The only thing we ask in return is that they occasionally respond to a few questions around how they feel about taking their medication, and then we use this feedback to sell in obviously an anonymized and aggregated manner to paying pharma customers who can then use this real-world evidence data to improve their medicines for the millions of patients that are out there. I don't want to spend too much time on this outside of what I've already done, though. So I'll urge you to see more on our website. You have the link down here. Try our app, which you can download from your app store, and then also maybe look up your medicines at drugsdisclosed.com, where you can see how other people using that same medication experience their lives with that drug. So, I mean, just go ahead. Then to the point. So this is basically what I'm going to talk about. Startups often look at the big companies to learn, but I would also argue that big companies, and including FP&A in big companies, can learn a thing or two from startups as well. A startup is doing at least one thing every day that it hasn't done before. And this means that the future is, well, even more unforeseeable than it is for big and mature companies. So, with that in mind, who can really set future performance expectations? My view is that FP&A is both here in a smaller company, but also in bigger companies closest to the numbers. And there's really no value in FP&A trying to avoid performance accountability by referring to, the business owner as the true accountable party. I would argue that you'd rather lean out the window and give your own best guess on future outcome. Each individual needs to take full responsibility for the company's success, and this really redefines the role of finance as well when you're in a startup. Secondly, a startup typically burn more money than it earns. I mean, we do. We survive on investor cash so far, and you burn that much money without earning anything in the beginning as you're trying to figure out what is the business model and what is the product market fit. So that means that your time is limited and your resources are very scarce. So everything everything around you is basically changing constantly. You need a very aggressive prioritization, as it really is a race against the clock, and you need to be flexible and move with the business. So, from a finance perspective, this really forces you to cut to the very bone of everything you do and to rethink your role as a finance person. Finally, big companies often have big finance functions. I know that is not true for everybody, but for most it is. And it allows, for the division of tasks and specialization of competencies. Well, in a startup, you have fewer resources and you have to wear more hats. You're forced to play the whole range of tunes within finance because who else can do it? This, however, also allows you to carefully consider which metrics are more important. And cash, although important in all companies, is often not on the top of a P&A agenda, at least in my experience. But it is really the core of everything in a startup. So, using planning, which is a core FP&A exercise, I'll reflect on these three areas based on my personal learnings from being both in big companies and then in startup. So, take responsibility. In my previous jobs, it was a high priority to ensure that the business were made accountable for the commercial and the financial performance. So forecasts were built bottom up by the business, and was a very time-consuming task for the whole organization. The reason, of course, was to ensure that the business felt full ownership of the financial performance and commercial plans. In a startup, though, you need to make assumptions that are seldomly easily verifiable from data or from the business, owing to the fact that you don't have a lot of history. And the business seldomly have a good guess on the future. So making the business accountable for the forecasting makes sense theoretically, particularly if the company is mature and not changing that much. Still, I would argue that FP&A has the best knowledge about performance and is in a better position to assess performances holistically. The business should play a key part in planning, but only from the point of sharing key commercial assumptions. I would argue that FP&A should be in the driver's seat when it comes to doing the actual planning. So why not start, by developing your view on, an all else equal scenario, and then discuss with the business if something is out of the ordinary needs to be considered in your planning. So, my view on this, coming from both a big company and then, now in a startup, is that FP&A planning is not just a coordination and consolidation task. it should be a centralized, qualified perspective on the company's future performance, which means that the FP&A are responsible for the planning based on inputs from the business and not the other way around. I mean, and that was what I experienced sometimes in a big company, is that somehow this about making the business accountable for performance and planning also meant that the FP&A team didn't want to get too involved in the actual planning. It was more coordination and consolidation task. And also, normal business is normal business and typically easy to guess. You can calculate it if you can put it into a model and a few assumptions here and there, and then everything turns out, and it's not changing that much. So if you if it's easy to guess and you spend fewer hours on that, you can focus much more on uncovering the extraordinary things. So I would argue that a lot of time and resources could be saved, even in big mature companies, from rethinking your approach to planning from a bottom-up consolidation exercise to a centralized top-down scenario exercise. As the CFO in DrugStars, I do all the planning based on the data I have available, and only when I feel comfortable with the forecast, I bring it to the business and we discuss, if there's anything we haven't seen or something that needs consideration, something new, something's changed. But it all starts with me actually leaning out the window and saying, this is where I believe we're going. This is what the data suggests. So the second lesson here is around prioritization. And I'll be talking a bit about the standardization, which is also something that was high on the agenda in my previous jobs, both in terms of processes and tools, because it allowed, this one truth, and it also simplified the actual consolidation of bottom-up forecasts. However, it also meant that we often found ourselves in situations where our model was, insufficient, either because it was unable to capture a new business or where our causal relationship proved not to hold anymore. The planning model was commercially simple in my previous job, but technically it was very complex. And this meant that, it was extremely difficult to adjust or change anything. It also required, the system required planning at a very low level, at least at the level of actuals. And this overwhelmed often the commercial planning discussion with what you can argue is irrelevant financial detail. And in a startup, you need to be ready to make significant adjustments to your planning model as the realities and the business changes, often dramatically. And obviously because the business model and the product market fit keeps evolving. So standardization doesn't make sense because your business isn't standardized. So consequently, your planning model needs to be sufficiently simple in order to allow you to quickly change the assumptions or internal causalities within drivers. And in addition, you do not have the time nor the resource to do detailed financial forecasting at the same level as actuals. And even though you do have the time to plan at this level, it wouldn't add value at all because, in an uncertain world, rather approximately right than precisely wrong. And the more uncertain the future, the more approximately you need to be. So my view is that you carefully consider what time is spent, how the time is spent in your planning process, and evaluate if there are any things that can be down prioritized. FP&A planning needs to be flexible in order to adjust to the changing internal and external environment, and even the tactical and strategic change of focus. And as I said at the previous page, normal business is normal business. It seldomly changes from one day to the other. So rather spend time with the business assessing the key events or the new business in your planning than being occupied with the financial detail. Final one, manage cash. So I worked in companies that had, more cash than you would ever dream of. So in the FP&A team, we seldomly worried about cash, at least not running out of cash. Cash was something that the treasury department, would look at and optimize and so on. Now, working in a startup with a limited runway and a very uncertain future financial capability, you quickly learn that cash needs, basically all your attention. If you run out of cash, your business is dead. You need to pay your employees or they will stop working. And, it's not nice to have to call a vendor and say that you need a little more time to pay the bill and all these things. So, this guy, Jack Welch from General Electric, he was on the spot. Cash is king indeed. So in terms of planning, I would argue that if your forecast model does not support a qualified cash flow statement, I would argue that you have a problem. The cash flow forecast will tell you if your sales team need to change their plans simply because, otherwise there basically is no sales team, no matter what their excuses are for, a lower sales forecast or whatever. So, the cash flow forecast will also tell you if your product and development roadmap is simply not focused on the right things, or, even at a pace whereby future product launches are simply irrelevant because you're out of business before the launch. So, personally, in my current job, I use a simulated cash flows throughout my planning process to evaluate if something needs changing. For instance, if because our runway becomes too short. Are we doing the right things that allows us to show results short term while making sure that we have a runway to a sufficient runway doing it? So it's crucial that I have this cash flow statement throughout my planning process, not just in the end, but throughout, just to make sure that we plan and focus on the right things in our discussions. So, my view is that, all attention should be on cash and basically build from that. I would argue that your planning model should output cash flow statements as early in the planning process as possible because it allows you to consider while you're having your discussions with the business if your plans need changing. So just a quick summary here, 3 things. That's the only thing we all remember, right? So yeah, business should definitely be made accountable for performance, but I also think that FP&A should be part responsible for performance and should definitely have a point of view on future outcome scenarios based on at least on all else equals. And yeah, standardization is definitely a must-have in big companies, but reality has changed no matter what you do. So beware that your detail is not too low, and also beware that your model doesn't become too rigid. And then finally, cash flow is important, even for big companies. So, but still, what is the role of cash flow in your planning process? For me, it's both the start, it's the middle, and it is definitely also the end. So I'm just around the end of my presentation here, and I realized that all companies are different, and not all big mature companies, well, not even all small startup companies are the same. But either way, I do hope these few pages led to a bit of reflections, or maybe it didn't. If it did, it was great. If not, then I'm definitely I apologize for the inconvenience, basically. So yeah, time for questions.
Questions, comments, points of agreement or disagreement. You're welcome to either raise your hand or you can type a question or a chat.
I definitely. I would be curious to see if any of you guys think that FP&A team could play a more active role in the commercial planning than it does today. And secondly, also, if you believe that you could apply a more flexible approach to planning than you do today, because again, companies are different and at different maturities levels. But my experience is that as companies become big, planning becomes more rigid, and it also comes with a bit of a backside. You can see there is a question here. Yeah. How often do you forecast in such rapidly changing environment? Constantly. But at least I'm doing a full forecast once a month. And it is easy to do that because we're a small team and I can turn around it quickly. But again, it's a matter of how the level of detail. So I can quickly run through calculate a base case scenario and then build on that. So it's much more about discussing with the business where we're heading, what we need to change, than it is actually doing the math itself. Thanks for the question.
But overall, you're having transitioned to a smaller company. Are you personally more fulfilled and happy with the range of new responsibilities versus being in a much larger organization?
I hope there's none of my old colleagues here, but no, I would say that my time with Chile and also very much Pandora was great times, and I had it was big companies. You had a lot of network, and I think we did a lot of good things. Personally, I would say that moving into a smaller company where you have to play more tunes within finance, I feel I came from the university directly into business controlling, and I'm not the kind of accounting way. So I was very much a business controller by heart. What this has learned me with a startup is that because I have to do everything, I also get a broad financial capabilities and competencies. So this about cash suddenly becomes much more clear to me. A lot of the accounting tasks becomes much more clear to me, and it's definitely something different, and I feel that I've learned a lot, and I also feel that I've taken things with me from this world that I would believe could add value in also bigger companies. And it's really all about flexibility and prioritization.
Interesting. Any other questions or comments from the audience? You certainly picked a different, more relevant industry for what we're dealing with right now than your previous product line, let's say.
Yeah. I guess I can just share a quick anecdote here. We've just donated around I believe it was 19,000 euros to WHO to their COVID-19 response fund. As part of our business, and I think that's actually quite giving. That you can try to build a business, have fun, maybe earn a buck or two, but at the same time also doing good for others, and hopefully change for us the way that pharma is the pharma industry and payers and patients are working together. So yeah.
Okay, well, I think we have time for, we have another question from Maxime. Thank you, Kim. If you would return back to a big company, given your startup experience, what would be the first thing you would change in FP&A in a large company?
Yeah, that's a really relevant question, and basically I think what I would be focusing on first and foremost would be to test our planning model. To see if it's flexible enough. Are we spending, and planning model and planning process are two are interlinked, and I do believe that I would, at least my experience from Pandora, for example, is we could spend our time differently to allow more focus on actual commercial discussions, and it comes down to what do we require of input from finance in a forecast, because basically my experience is that there's a lot of hours going into simply trying to get the numbers put in at a very low detail, and it really does make sense. And then also, do we understand our business? Can we define the drivers of our business in a way that it also allows us to do quick turnarounds of all else equal scenarios based on very few assumptions? Because I believe that those companies can, at least to some extent, boil down their business into few drivers. And maybe there are some that maybe there's a lot, but there's at least a few key drivers, and then the rest maybe less important. So planning model, planning process. Are we focusing on the right things? Change the planning model if it's not flexible enough. And take responsibility as an FP&A department, because we should have a point of view. Thanks for that question.
Maybe one more, if there's any final comment or question to Kim from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand too, and you can actually have a face-to-face question.
Well, you're welcome.
I see. I'm glad you have answered that question, and I would like as well, on the behalf of the audience, then to thank you for your presentation, and I say we appreciate it very much. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks, Robert, for having me. I'll see you out there someday. Stay safe.
We will now reconvene at 2:45, so that's in 15 minutes for the next session. So we will be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.